Sergeant Alex Costas sat staring into the flames of the fire. He'd agreed with Mondale's decision not to wait for the UN troops. Their equal bullshit would have probably killed more men by now, but it was about the only thing he'd agreed on. Mondale was still unconscious in the field hospital corner of the engine shed. Lung damage, the medic had said. The best hope for recovery was to put him under and keep him there so his body could repair itself, and Alex had no problem with that. It meant he was in a position he'd long sought but never expected to reach, and alternative plans for the attack were sketchy at best. His earlier small task force to find the ops hadn't been a big risk because he'd had a ready excuse for it, but more planning would have been flagged as insubordination. His force was down 63 men, dead and incapacitated, but the bulk of them were dry and still eager for a fight. There'd be no more rushing forward, that was for sure. It was all about the sneak, and he needed intel. Mondale's appraisal had turned out to be catastrophically wrong. His wouldn't be. And that was why, 5 minutes earlier, he'd sent 2 small recon forces into progress, while the rest of his force was arriving at the engine shed and getting bedded in. This was going to take time, and he was in no hurry. Once the fuel and ammo stores made it to the engine shed, he'd have to move, but until then he could stare into the flames and let his mind wander over his options. Nick out, taped open the fuel nozzle and heard the fuel gurgle into the hastily hacked channel in ice. Sounds could be heard for kilometres, but luckily there seemed no Australians nearby. He and the Norwegians had found the perfect tiny window of opportunity as the Aussies finished the process of moving into progress. There were only 2 tanks left. If they could fully empty them, then it would make a significant dent in the enemy's mobility. Unclipping his ice pick, he made an exploratory attempt to pierce the tank wall. The pick went in easily through the first layer and got stuck in the hole. He pulled and wiggled it free. Like a giant can opener with just as loud a rasp, he could hear one of the Norwegians doing the same 5 metres away. He thumped another hole close to his first and tried to tear between the 2. A third hole allowed him to begin levering the outside skin aside. 6 minutes later he had access to the inside tank wall. His ice pick made a dull thud and dented the metal. Again, the dent deepened. 3rd time. He could see fuel sweating at the small hole. Another. This time his ice pick stuck in the hole and would not be wriggled free, his face flushed with the exertion. Letting go of the ice pick, he searched about, straining to hear the returning Aussies. Kvam had loaded one of the enemy's sleds with ammo and was giving instructions to the 2 soldiers who'd come with him. It was time to go. Yanking on the ice pick, he fell backwards as it came free. Fresh fuel gushed from the new hole. He scrambled away, standing up. Already the ammo sled was shrinking as the soldiers hauled at speed. Kvam waved at him to retreat, and Nickau nodded in agreement. A low buzz from the direction of progress was becoming a louder roar. He caught up with Kvam, his calf muscles aching afresh at the high stepping action he'd taken through the snow. "Do you hold the tank?" he asked the sergeant. "Yes, not big but enough. Even if it doesn't empty, we've hurt them. Every move on a snowmobile will have to be thought about." "How much ammo is left?" "We got everything, though it looks like they'd already moved 2 sleds worth," said Kvam. "I overloaded this one." "They're on the way back. We'll have to chuck it in the first crevasse we come to." Kvam looked over at him as they stepped together. "You're all right for militia." "I wasn't sure about it. Gives me hope we're doing the right thing." "It's not a choice," he replied. "The rest of the world is going to be," his laboured breath vaporised ahead of him, "a shit show for some time to come. No amount of legislation can make up for all that fried tech. The UN will pull all of us off Antarctica, back to refugee camps. Been there, done that, not fun." "You make a good point, Mr. Burns." Ahead they could see the sled had stopped, the soldiers beginning to throw the boxes into the maw of the crevasse. Across the ice sheet Nikou could hear shouting. He and Kvam stepped faster to the crevasse. "Tip the whole thing in," Nikou shouted. "We've got to get going." He arrived at the side of the still heavily laden sled, along with the sergeant. A box of semis had split open, having fallen from the sled. Nikou had a handgun. It seemed churlish not to take one and some ammo before adding to the loud clattering as boxes emptied guns and bullets into the blue gash. "You leave, we'll bring up the rear," said Kvam to him, nodding towards the fuel tanks. Nikou needed no urging. He could hear the returning snowmobiles. A fight was inevitable. The sun was low, casting confusing shadows off the ice pillars. Nikou picked his way slowly across the net of crevasses and ice bridges. The sound of gunfire halted him briefly, then caused him to run. His cramponed boot failed to stick in a large stride. He slipped. Fingers dug for purchases his feet made for the open edge he'd tried to cross. Panting, he pulled himself out of danger. The gunfire continued behind, setting his back taut. He slowed his pace despite his accelerating adrenaline. As he cleared the final crevasse, he could see the two soldiers they'd left behind. He waved at them to start down. They didn't move. Finally, he reached them. "Where is Sergeant Kvam?" one asked. "We had to tip the ammunition. The Aussies came back. Kvam stayed to fight. I don't know." The full import of what was happening hit Nikou as hard as if he'd slipped and kept falling. Despair lurked at the end of that. The Australians would call for backup. Surely. He'd not get down to the beach. Die dangling like one of those Mexican paper things with the sweets in it. But he rallied. It was worth it. Let's see the bastards get by with no ammo. "We will wait," said the other soldier. "Sergeant Kvam is hard. He will make it." Alex Costa's reverie was rudely interrupted by the hurried slamming of the sliding door, bringing a gusting freeze that guttered the flames in front of him. He stood. Haste was never good news. "Sir, somebody, I mean it has to be them, sir. They've got to the fuel tanks and the ammo. The retrieval team radioed. They met resistance on arrival back for the final run," said 3 combatants. "There was fuel leaking and no sign of the ammo. Sarge, how?" "Fuck. They had to have climbed up. Bloody Alexander trick, I should have guessed." "Send support and jerry cans. We've got to get any remaining fuel. Find out what they did with the ammo. Maybe it's recoverable. Move!" Nikou stood off the ice cliff, toes dug into the ice, rope in hand. Perhaps the soldiers were right about Kvam, but the scene with him hanging, exposed on the rope while being shot at, wouldn't stop playing across his mind. He bent his knees, pushed, felt the brief tug of the ice to his crampons leaving, and then he was free. The rope moved through the belay. He dropped and came smashing back to the ice wall. Tried to stop the crampons digging in too deep. A rhythm built with each push off as he attempted to control his fall down a kilometre of glacier. He reached the first anchor point and swapped rope. Shards of ice fell down from above. He risked a squint up into the light, expecting gunfire. An arse hung out over the edge. Thank fuck. It looked like the Norwegians were okay. He set off again in a rain of ice chips and bigger chunks, his heart lighter than before. Domingo sat in the radio shack of Weddell City on a makeshift camp bed pushed into a corner. Sitting at the centre of a web of communication across the continent, feeling more of a helpless fly than a spider. Daniel had left an hour ago to get some sleep, saying something about not needing to be masochistic about it. But he couldn't leave. He'd left before, and look what had happened. Paralysed by superstition and guilt, he eyed the pillow on the camp bed and wondered whether to lie down or not. What was coming through from Arnie at Progress Songshan sounded bad. Arnie was angry and worried. Domingo had taken those emotions and added his own strength of feeling to them, venting immediately to Gordon when he called up about what they'd do to anyone caught running illicit trade after this was over. Gordon's voice haunted him. "They've gone." That was all he said when Domingo had paused. And then Domingo had had to search his mental database of what was happening where to realise with horror that the pirates had moved in the McMurdo direction after hitting the Australian base. It couldn't have been McMurdo, because that was where Gordon was calling from, and everybody should have been in McMurdo. Gordon had left Weddell in a hurry. He could have only arrived in time to find out his son wasn't there. How was Daniel going to take this?